Hello. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And to our live streamers as well. Thank you, first of all, to Jim Hancock, who's not here yet today, for filling in last week. I hope he didn't lead you too much astray. I doubt that. And thank you to Jim for handling the live streaming last week. And we're all cattywampus here. That drives me crazy. When that happens, how in the world do I solve that? Well, so the problem here is the new iPhone, where they have the off button, is right where the clamp ought to be on the thing. But anyhow, you may remember I actually turned off the stream 2 different times, clamping it onto the thing. Technical stuff you don't have to care about, but anyhow. So glad to see you all. I was just explaining, I just had a complete brain fart yesterday and forgot about Cody's service, Cody Fort service. I know some of y'all were here. I understand it was lovely, and I'm just embarrassed beyond words that it was last night after Jim posted something from it, and I thought, oh my goodness, I forgot to go. Just forgot.
There's some programs over there on the table.
Okay. So for those of you who are here, thank you. I understand it was very, very nice. And very Cody.
Oh, yeah.
And just what, a year later, almost.
And half the people there were wearing red for color.
She loved red.
Me neither.
The cutest part about the whole thing was they read a report from her 3rd grade class, and they said, the teacher said, she's such a sweet little girl, but she really has to learn not to talk so much.
So for those at home, Caroline just said they read a report from Cody's 3rd grade class where the teacher said she's very cute, but she needs to learn not to talk so much. Dorothy, did you ever write a report like that to a parent?
They said it showed up again the next month, too. Didn't get very far.
Well, I mean, there are worse problems to have, right? Much, much worse problems to have. So I've got a question for y'all before we begin today. We're going to, Lord willing, the creek don't rise. We're going to conclude 1 Thessalonians today. Would you like to go on and do 2 Thessalonians, or are you tired of Thessalonians? Would you like to do something entirely different?
Anything you do is fine. I'm fine with 2nd.
Things get a lot more contentious in 2 Thessalonians because the niceties end. So if you're looking for conflict, we're going to get that in 2 Thessalonians. Again, it's not a long book, and for our pace of things, it'll just be a few weeks. You know, there's a reason I've never taught Isaiah, by the way, because it would take us 3 years. And you would think you were wandering in the wilderness the entire time. Same thing with Exodus. Yeah, just, I don't think we can ever do that at all. Oh, my goodness. Well, I was supposed to be preaching in a church in Fort Worth last Sunday, and they canceled on me midweek because they're a small church, and they determined there were not going to be enough people there that they would feel respectable with me being there. I'm like, well, okay. So I just took the Sunday off, and it was very nice. Appreciate you letting me be gone on that. Allison and I, we'll be here. I'll be here the next few Sundays. We are going on a little vacation, not this week, but next week, but we'll be back. We'll be here on both bookend Sundays. So looking forward to that as well. My good friend Marv Knox has agreed to fill in for me at work for a week, which is about the only way that can happen when you're a small shop. So.
Another self-declared sabbatical.
Right. Yeah, one of the big adjustments for me is when I was on staff here, I managed about 100 people. There are literally more than 100 people who work for the church. About 30 ministerial and administrative staff, but then you have custodial staff, and you have ECLC, and just other random people around here that we take care of. And now I have a staff of 3, including me. So things are a bit different in that regard. Well, so as we approach this last part of 1 Thessalonians in chapter 5, things take a bit of a turn. I think Jim got y'all through the end times prophecy. Thank God. So you have to listen to me on that. So we're going to pick up today in. We're going to pick up today in verse. Where'd it go? 12. Chapter 5, verse 12 of 1 Thessalonians. And here, Paul is sort of giving the Thessalonians some final advice, as you do in a letter, right? He's been through all this other stuff, and now this is a combination of encouragement and advice. And I've tried each week to pick a word or two that we're going to focus on. There are actually several ideas in this that I think are very relevant to us. So let's just read this first part together. And again, I'm going to read from this interlinear translation so we can comment on a few things. We implore you, however, brothers and sisters, to appreciate those toiling among you. And the word appreciate here has been translated different ways. Now think about, before you jump too far on this, realize there was no professional clergy in the early church. Everybody was a volunteer. Everybody was in this together. So this has got to be, there are other places where Paul talks about paying your servants. This is not probably one of those, although you could. But it really is about appreciating each other in the context of the leadership of the church. Appreciate those who are toiling among you and taking the lead over you. So this is about leadership in the church. And that would not have necessarily been clergy or paid leadership in this. Again, we're talking about house churches here, who are taking leadership over you, taking the lead over you in the Lord, and who are admonishing you. And I urge you to esteem them exceedingly in love. That combination is really great. I urge you to esteem them in love.
Back that up, admonish?
I admonish you to.
Okay.
Yeah. In other words, this word admonish is not just I'm telling you to, I'm urging you to, right? I'm compelling you to, right? And do this, he says, because of the work they are doing. He doesn't say do this because they're great people. Don't do this because you like them or you're their family members or whatever. Love them and encourage them because of the work they are doing. And this has such broad application to so many other situations. We were talking about Cody and her school teacher a moment ago. If ever there was a day when school teachers need to be appreciated, it is absolutely today, in which we need to love them for the work they are doing, even if you don't like them as a person, right? Because there's not a much harder job in America today than being a school teacher in the context in which we live. Do this because of this, and be at peace among yourselves. Be at peace among yourselves. Now, keep in mind, we got to just, I know that I'm a broken record on this. Paul is writing to people in the late 1st century, and they expect the imminent return of Christ. Everything Paul is saying here is predicated on his firm view that Jesus is coming soon, and that there is no time for intense debate and distraction on anything. Everything Paul's saying is all focused on this urgency. And so given this time, he says, be at peace with among yourselves, right? Verse 14. There's some strong verbs in here. As a grammarian, always pay attention to the verbs. We exhort you now. So here we are again. This is not just a suggestion. We exhort you, brothers and sisters, to admonish, here we are again, to admonish the unruly. All right. We exhort you to admonish the unruly and encourage. There's 3 things here. You got to look at the set. Admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted. I'm sorry, there's 4 things. Help the weak and be patient toward all. My goodness. Why don't you ask us to move a rock up a hill, right? Admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, and be patient toward all. Whew.
How did they get, you've got unruly, the NRSV says idlers.
So there's an interesting debate over this word. Thank you for pointing that out. This word that I translated unruly in verse 14. Some translators give the word idlers. And by other scholarly accounts, that's a really bad translation. And it's not often that I'm going to poo-poo the NRSV. But this is one of those times when I think we have to say, okay, like one of my business consultant friends is always saying, well, you suggested, and he says, well, we could do that. We could do that, which is his way of saying, I don't think that's the best thing to do, but if you really want to do that, okay. And that's sort of where this comes in. There's scholarly debate over the meaning of this particular word. The word faint-hearted that I used as well in that same sentence also has some debate about it. What it basically means is those who are of small courage.
Is that the same thing as feeble-minded?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, no, this is people who just, think Cowardly Lion. All right, what we've got here is the Wizard of Oz. All right, so think Cowardly Lion on this one. Someone, the Greek word means someone without a healthy identity or a developed individuality, someone who doesn't have the courage of their convictions. That's someone who's faint-hearted in this case. Whereas the word unruly that we're talking about actually means someone who is disorderly, but it also can mean someone who slacks off on their duty, right? Someone who's out of order, someone who's not paying attention to what they're supposed to be doing. And I tell you, in studying this word and this phrase this week, I was reminded, sadly, of an extreme example of this. So this is an extreme example of this. Surely you have seen the news item about the woman who was viciously attacked and raped on the Philadelphia train this week. There were multiple bystanders on the train, and over the course of 12 stops, 12 stops, this went on. People were holding up their phones, videotaping it. And the woman was attacked. No one intervened. Now, there's a whole, I read an article yesterday about how even the act of trying to capture the video on your phone could be an interjection, because you could say, well, the person assumes if the attacker sees that you're being videotaped, you're going to stop, right? Well, it didn't work. And the only way this ended was when a trained security officer happened to get on at like the 12th stop and saw what was going on and intervened. All the passersby didn't. Now, this is a classic study in conflict avoidance. But it is one of the most extreme you can possibly imagine, right? But this same principle, I'm telling you, this is an extreme version. But I have noticed that the same principle behind that applies to people in the church who are naturally conflict averse. So I have, honest to God, seen situations where you have an unruly church member who everyone knows is an unruly church member attacking people, attacking the pastor, attacking other lay leaders in the church, and no one says a word to stop it because they don't want to get in the conflict. And you've probably seen this happen as well. The idea seems to be, what can I do? I'm helpless in this situation, right? Or I might get beat up in this situation as well, right? There is something about human nature that is avoiding conflict, whether it's an extreme situation like that train, or a less extreme situation like what might happen at church, or in your community, or in your political realm, or in your workplace, or in your school. You just fill in the blanks for different places. And this is how good people get beat up. And I think what Paul is saying here to the early church is there are unruly, out of control people among you. And you've got to have the courage. Don't be faint-hearted. You've got to have the courage to stand up for what's right and not let the bully win. That's my read on it. Comments?
What happens when you stand up to them and they get admonished for causing an issue?
Well, so the person who stands up gets admonished?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the risk you take, right? And this is why a lot of people don't intervene.
It's
Yeah.
so hard in a church. I've seen it happen. You've seen it happen.
Right.
We're taught to be nice.
We're taught to be nice at church.
We're taught to be nice.
Yeah.
For goodness sakes, you don't fight in a church.
Nope.
You know, my mommy told me not to do that. I get in trouble for talking too much.
Yeah.
I saw an entire Sunday school class taken down by one person.
Right.
That you can see. There's no violence. You can see. It's so
Right.
clever. It's so quiet. It's hard, Mark.
Oh, I know.
You're not taught to do that.
You just hit the nail on the head. Ann?
I think that recently happened to one of our residents
Ah, okay.
in this church.
Well,
People asked,
oh, right. Yeah. One of our resident alumni. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so even, you don't have to be a dysfunctional church for this to happen. Because niceness is the order of the day at church, right? And I see the same thing happen. If you look at what's happening in school, we talked about teachers earlier. Look at the attacks that some, I'm sorry, crazy parents are lobbying against teachers and school districts and school boards right now. I mean, we have a dear friend who recently retired from being a school board trustee, and it was just brutal, absolutely brutal. In our own Richardson district, the chair of the school board resigned because she couldn't take the attacks anymore, just at the bottom of it, from some unhinged people.
A small group of unhinged.
A small group, and there's got to be someone else with the courage to say, you're wrong.
I don't think they hear.
They may not hear, but I tell you, the person who's being attacked would hear.
That's true.
And I'll give you an example. Back during the Troubles here, it sounds like Northern Ireland. I'm thinking of one individual in particular who was so vicious, so mean to multiple people, lay leadership and clergy alike, literally finger in the face, shouting at people at public meetings. And I can think of only one person who had the courage to pull that person aside and say, you cannot behave that way here. One. Because it's just not what we're taught to do. And here we are in the early church. And there's all sorts of conflict already brewing because it's people, right? And I think Paul is encouraging them, even from the beginning, you've got to stand up and you've got to speak for the good of the whole. Yeah.
It's been quite a long time ago, about 40 or 50 years, I think, where I read an article about an experiment that was set up to try to measure this sense of responsibility to step in and rescue somebody in the aftermath of a murder that took place on a street one night in New York City.
Ah.
And as a result of this experiment, they decided that a big part of the problem is when you have a group of people, you have a diffusion of responsibility sensed among those people, and so nobody does anything. Whereas then they set up the experiment being, they would have this person who's going to be checked or measured, put inside a room waiting to see somebody in an office. Then they heard a scream coming out of that office. If you had one person in there, he or she would get up and go in to see what was happening.
Oh.
And discovered it was all a fake anyway. But if you had half a dozen people sitting there, each of whom waiting to see somebody, they ought to have sat there rather tensely and didn't do a thing. And that's where they came up with that conclusion. How far that will go in reality, I don't know.
Well, it makes sense, though, right? So this, for those at home, this is the study that was done to see how people responded to the perception that someone was being killed in the next room. And if one person was in the room hearing it, they acted. But if half a dozen people were in the room hearing it, no one acted because of this. Part of this is human nature, right? Yeah.
We have a question. Linda Story wants to know, what were the troubles here? And I'm assuming in Thessalonians.
Oh, yeah, Linda, I'm talking about the LGBTQ debate, the inclusion debate. Yeah, sorry, I just euphemistically call it the troubles now. Okay, Jim?
But I noticed the next step says, see that none of you repays evil for evil, which means a lot of times we want to, when someone is, as some of these things,
Yeah.
these four things are, you sometimes want to go, well, I'll show them.
So, yeah, Jim, you just hit, Jim's pulling us forward to the next part of the scripture that makes this all the more difficult, right? Because Paul says, well, first of all, before we even get there, at the end of verse 14, he says, help the weak and be patient toward all. Well, which is it, Paul? Do you want me to be patient or do you want me to be proactive, right? And there's got to be some combination of this in real life that causes us to be patient but cautious, to be patient but proactive. In other words, don't fly off the handle the first time you see something because you could perceive it wrong, right? And Lord knows we have tons of examples we could give of how our perception of a situation is wrong. So I'm just going to make up some things right now. We could be walking down the street and you could see what you think is a parent abusing a child by jerking them really hard or maybe even slapping them or doing something you think is abusive. But what you might not have seen is the child was veering into traffic and was about to get hit by a car, right? So sometimes there's more to the story. Here's patience. Investigate, pay attention, find out what's going on in this. So be patient. I think the other part of this, though, that is important that I just sort of skirted over is this whole thing of encouraging the faint-hearted. Because there's just a lot of us who are faint of heart. Again, cowardly lion in this. We just don't feel like we have the authority to be heard. We don't feel like we have the standing. We feel like people are going to look funny at us. We're just lacking in courage. And that's what Paul's talking about here. But then he does go on to say, in verse 15, see that no one repays evil for evil. And good heavens, the applications of this are so broad that we could spend the rest of the class talking about it, right? Because the idea of I'm going to correct your bad behavior by doing more bad behavior on my part, this is Washington politics. This is Austin politics. This is, sadly, a lot of business culture as well, right? And sometimes it's family dynamics.
Okay, so we just had it in the Southern Baptist Convention. You just reported about how the guy who lost the election is suing the guy who won?
No, a different guy. Yeah, who he thinks caused him to lose.
So
after the guy who's now filing the lawsuit is the one who first defamed the other guy.
So is that evil for evil, or is that?
It's stupidity is what it is. Because that lawsuit doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell of proceeding.
But he's causing some issues.
But he is, and it's a publicity stunt, in my opinion. Yeah, because he's very certain of his beliefs, and the whole thing's just crazy. I mean, really, really crazy. Charlene?
Ellen Minning tells about the 10-year-old who stood up at the school board meeting where people kept getting interrupted and said that behavior was unacceptable, and the most unruly tried to shut her down.
Yeah, this was actually in the news,
right,
where this child stood up at one of these school board meetings and said, you know, you all are behaving badly, and the child got shouted down. Right? This is out of control, right? And when this happens in the church, which ought to be a model for other places, Paul is saying, you gotta be reasonable about this, right? But as you do it, don't just perpetuate more evil in place of evil. As my father used to teach me as a child, this saying has stuck with me forever: 2 wrongs don't make a right. Have you heard that one? Oh, dear God. Yeah. Just drilled into my head as a child: 2 wrongs don't make a right. And I think that's also what Paul is saying here about this. See that no one repays evil for evil, but anyone, if you can repay the good, how does that end of verse? How does that second half of verse 15 go in your translation? Someone
Seek to do good to one another and to everyone.
seek to do good. Okay, here's the problem here. Because a lot of times we think that seeking to do good is just to be quiet. And I'll tell you, the people who get this are the most extreme fundamentalists, who are the ones who are, oh God, I'm so tired of these memes on Facebook. They go something like this. I would rather please God than get the applause of culture. Which is basically saying, I know you think I'm doing bad stuff, but I'm just doing it in God's name. That's not what this is talking about, right? This is talking about seeking to do good for people because, and particularly in this context, Paul's talking about wanting to encourage everyone to be loving to the extent they can. Now, elsewhere in Paul's writings, and we'll get to this in 2 Thessalonians, I believe, there are some limits to this because otherwise you become a doormat and you're just going to let people walk all over you while you say, I'm just doing good, right? And that's not a healthy way to live either in this. Before our time is up, I want to get to this next part though, because this is really, I think, even more important than what we've talked about. And this is a passage you know and probably have been troubled about before. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. In everything give thanks. Now, I imagine you've heard some bad sermons, not here, in your previous life. I imagine you've heard some bad sermons about this passage. About whatever is afflicting you, just give thanks to God. Did your cow run off? Give thanks to God. Did your roof fall in? Give thanks to God. Did the crops fail? Give thanks to God. Right?
Or that it's the will of God.
And that is God's will. Susan?
Yeah, that's the verse.
Yeah, rejoice.
Rejoice and pray. Well, no, he's in the next verse. He skipped over the.
Oh, I skipped over one. Yeah, I'm in verse 16.
And that's the thing that scares me is here we are. We got the fighting and we got the with each other, and then he jumps in and says, "But rejoice." Like what?
Yeah, and he's sort of shifted gears here. And I want to come back to remind you the context in which this is written. The context in which Paul is writing is to a group of people who are facing intense persecution for their newfound beliefs and who are convinced that the end of time is in their lifetime. They're convinced that Jesus is returning within their lifetime, right? And so Paul is speaking to them on a big level, not on, he's on a meta level, mega level, not on the, he's not digging into the finite here. In the big picture of things, he says, rejoice because of the hope you have in eternity. Rejoice because Jesus is coming again. He's not saying rejoice because something bad happened to you. And here's where we get way, way off on this. Paul is not saying to be glad that bad things happen. And there's a lot of bad theology around this. What he is saying is, despite the bad things that happen, rejoice that there is salvation. Rejoice that there is something beyond. Rejoice that Jesus is coming again. Always keep this perspective, he says. There is something better coming. And I think the best way we can imagine this theology is to think of the Negro spirituals that do not deny the reality of the suffering of slavery, but repeatedly call for thinking about what's to come. Soon I will be done with the troubles of this world.
How do you define rejoice, though? Rejoice?
Find, yeah, so it's find joy in what's coming. It's not a Pollyanna. It's not a Pollyanna about the situation you're in. And here's the problem with this passage, because too many people want to bring it to say just a very bizarre thing. Well, the cow died, praise God. No, we're not praising God because your only cow died and you don't have any milk anymore. I'm back in a different culture at this point, right? My teenage child ran away from home. Well, praise God. No, that's not what this is about. What it's saying is, despite the agony of these things happening right now, there is salvation coming. And I can have joy in my spirit because of that, while being realistic about the pain of this moment, right? So again, think back to slavery. Horrible institution, horrible part of history, but we can learn from people who could not get out of their present situation, as abysmal as it was, but found a way to be joyful in the big scheme of things because they had to live with the hope that there was a better day coming, right? There had to be something better than this. Does that make sense? Yeah. To me, this changes the entire tenor of this verse that we struggle with. Jim?
Well, I think about y'all going through the time that the church had.
Yeah.
I can just see members who have been here 30, 40 years who are upset. They're ready to strangle their fellow members because they see things differently and they see the church devolving in their minds and they're upset and everyone's getting ready to yell at each other.
Yeah.
And then you're supposed to throw in there, rejoice. So
yeah, so that's that becomes,
it seems trite.
It is trite, and it becomes like saccharin. You know people who are so sweet and so fake that their sweetness is like saccharin. Do you remember saccharin?
Yeah. Kill people.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it'll kill you. But second, it was so sweet it was bitter, right? My grandmother used saccharin in her tea and coffee. And I remember as a child, do you remember those little bottles? And you just squeeze? And oh my gosh, that stuff's awful, right? I also had a colleague in the past who lived on drinking Tab. Speaking of really awful sweet, right? But there is a way to be sweet that's also bitter, that's not really sweet. And I think that's what you're talking about, Jim, with this. There's got authentic sweetness and authentic love is not denying this. And I think Paul's admonition to us, and I'm way out of time. I lied. I thought we were going to get through the end of 1 Thessalonians today. We're not. We're close. We're very, very close. But the point I want to end with here in verse 16, always rejoice. In all things, rejoice. And it ties to verse 17, which we're going to have to get to next week. Pray without ceasing. These things, I think, probably go together. Let's not get into that right now. But I want you to feel I want to absolve you of some guilt. Because a lot of us read this passage from 1 Thessalonians and say, I can't rejoice always. I don't rejoice always. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay. Because what Paul is calling us to do is to rejoice in the big picture, not in the trials of the moment. This is not taking some Pollyanna view to say that the horrible thing that's happened to you today is worthy of your rejoicing. That's not it. I hope that helps.
Sometimes, Mark, when you're in situations like you're talking about, it's very, very difficult to rejoice because it's difficult to see the big picture.
Yeah. So, Pat just said sometimes when you're in the middle of a trial, it's very difficult to see the big picture. That's where we often need someone to help us get perspective. We often need someone to help us get perspective. And we help each other. I know I'm way over time. One illustration. You've heard me talk about my friend, my 81-year-old friend, that I'm one of two people who we take care of. And he's got early dementia, and he has no friends and no family, and it's a train wreck. And the other person who helps me with this, it takes each of us saying to the other, okay, this is bad this week, but look how far we've come. Look, a year ago, he was trapped in his house. He couldn't get out. We've sold the house. A year ago, he was still driving recklessly. He sold his truck. He's not driving anymore. And sometimes you have to have someone say to you, yes, it is difficult, but look at the progress you've made. We're not where we want to be. We're not where we're going, but we got to have someone say, but we've done something, right? We've done something. It's like being on a diet and you say, but I haven't lost 50 pounds yet, right? But someone has to say to you, yeah, but you've lost 10. And you didn't gain 10. Let's stem the tide. All right, thanks for you who are joining us at home. Let's pray together, and then we're going to have our prayer concerns shared here in the class as well. Oh, Lord, grant us your grace today and always, and help us to somehow maintain a view of the big picture, and to be reminded that you are at work in the world around us, even when we can't see it in the moment. For those who are facing trials of various kinds, we pray for your strength today, your courage. Help us not to be faint of heart, but to be loving and to be active through Jesus Christ. Amen.